Jacob. He's uploading documents to the cloud and chatting notes to his outside agency partners. This is Zoe. She's rushing to share the customer list with marketing and is sending the latest product roadmap to her mobile device. Which one of them is creating insider risk? They both are. Everyone creates insider risk, sometimes with malicious intent, and sometimes just by doing their jobs. Empower productivity and protect your data with Code42 Incydr. Visit Code42.com to learn more.
Good morning, everyone. I come from Maine. It's warm and humid down here. The rain y'all got yesterday, I'm flying back home to tomorrow. Like Todd said earlier, it's great to see everybody in person. This is my first trip in 18 months. I pulled a hotel receipt out of this jacket yesterday from March 2020. So it was very, very interesting start. We'll skip the intro here. I just want to call out that picture. That is a professional headshot that your wife takes during a pandemic. That's what that looks like. All right, so what is insider risk? So we saw our brief video there. We're talking about a change in dynamic, almost a paradigm shift in the way we're talking about insiders. So we've talked about insider threat for years. We've talked about user behavior analytics and pairing those up to really understand what your users are doing, et cetera. But the reality is, and like we called out in that video, come on, clicker, we're humans. And every CISO and security professional in here can secure the things. You can secure part of your networks. And as we heard in the last session, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. And that when, if you see on the left-hand side of the screen here, that's us. We're humans. I bring risk to your networks every time I log in. I bring risk to our security team's network every time I log in. They bring risk to our network at Code42 every time they log in. Because when you think about insider risk, it's really about all of the people who have trusted access to all of the pertinent documentation that the organization's creating, modifying, and ultimately putting out into market. And we've reached this paradigm shift over the last, call it 18 months since the COVID curtain came down, of digital transformation happening about, I think the stat was about 7 years in a matter of weeks. Most of organizations around the country and around the globe really had to escalate, which opened up a huge vector of risk. So when you're looking at people and processes and technology, and you're pairing that with digital transformation, and as we saw in that brief video, employees just trying to get their job done every day. Well, that risk on the left-hand side really does encompass everybody. It is a bring your own home security environment, no matter where you are. We are in this hybrid moment where all of the documents that I create, I delete, I modify, and I ultimately exfil are happening off network. And they're happening on my endpoint, but there's things I can do there to take that off. And there's things that I can do, even though positive intent is there, there's things that I can do to put the organization at risk every day. I'm traveling this week. I have a laptop. I have a cell phone. I've connected to Wi-Fi at some point. There's things that I could easily mismanage there. But what I am not that 1% on the right-hand side of the screen. I'm not maliciously trying to sabotage the network. But that 1%, while that can make some headlines, it's the other 99% that actually can cause the real damage within the environment. Why? Because that risk is pervasive, and that risk continues to expand every single day. And when we look at the business need and the problem behind it, it's not about insider risk or insider threat. It's about containing corporate data leaks. It's about making sure that corporate IP can either stay inside or is easily contained in near real time after an event is to fire. And when you look at the distributed workforce, the first thing we call out here in that icon algorithm is the person, right? It starts and ends with identity. You can do whatever you want with the endpoint. You can nuke that endpoint. You can turn my endpoint off from connecting to the network. If you haven't affected anything with my identity, I can leverage Okta to get in on another machine. I can leverage Okta to get in on my phone. I could look at different ways to get into the network at that point to get access to that information. Because as users, we're constantly trying to be creative. We're constantly trying to get our jobs done. We're constantly trying to excel. So step one of that algorithm is the humans. Then we get to the endpoints, the laptops that all of your organizations have issued to us, right? Those laptops are gateways to millions of files within the organization. Those millions of files on those laptops controlled by humans have access to hundreds of vectors, removable media, cloud storage, email, et cetera, that are a one click away from accidentally uploading something to my personal G drive as opposed to my corporate G drive. And the second I do that, that's a data breach. I've sent that off network, off corporate structure, infrastructure and into a place that is technically unsanctioned. And what does that equal at the end of the day? That's a corporate data leak. I've been victim of this at Code42, of all places. I was in my 3rd week at Code42, ran an update on my personal Mac. My personal Mac, I didn't uncheck that thing. I didn't create a unique alias for my Mac at work. What that really did is it brought all my desktop files directly into my personal iCloud. About 30 seconds later, I got a call from security asking me what I was doing. So that's what happens when you can do that. It's very easy. Ran an update on a machine that wasn't corporately sanctioned, that still pulled my corporate data into a personal space. And when we look at how that is a real problem and why that is a real problem, it's because change is inherent. The next 4 questions on this slide are really reflective of that change. When are you exposed? Where are you exposed? Where does that look like? Where are these files coming from? Where are they going to? Ultimately, how are you going to be put at risk, right? Where is that? And it comes down to that human factor, right? Your endpoints, unless they're taken over by a malicious third party from the outside, are controlled by the humans that you gave trusted access to all of that corporate IP. And the things that you won't tolerate are fairly obvious. It's that sensitive information, that critical information leaving. Could be customer information, could be product information, could be R&D, could be roadmaps, et cetera. And as we saw in that video, people are trying to get their jobs done, right? And we're in a bring your own home environment. I'm traveling this week. I might need to print something in the business center. Where am I sending that to get it to the business center? Am I sending that directly? How am I offering that information up? And the lack of visibility that most folks have had in security to actually see that makes sense, right? Look at these 4 key features here. They're really split into 2 functions. One is a burdened security team on the right-hand side. The other is a very aggressive workforce trying to better the company's bottom line, achieve those corporate goals so everybody in the organization can hit their bonuses. The worlds collide, though, because me trying to get my job done at a very fast pace may not be in line with security policy internally. That's partly on me. That's partly on security for not being able to see it or making me aware of it. But when we look at the combination of the two, there is a happy medium in between. Right? There is the ability to affect change and reduce the ultimate risk structure, risk profile of your organization by looking at where these two can come along. But unfortunately, though, in the vendor world, that's not what we've been looking at. These are all pre-COVID numbers. These are all pre-shutdown, right? 90% of the spend is on external, but we're seeing 2/3 of those breaches happen from internal. Trusted users leaking corporate data. And almost 3/4 of those go undetected for years, right? About a year at a time before that happens. And when you think about your data being out there for more than an hour, more than a minute, more than a week or a day, a year later, that data's munked. You're just going through at this point and suing somebody because they did you dirty, they did you wrong. But what happens if you could have visibility into that? And what happens if you could create a framework around that? So we don't run into this, because you do need to spend money on your IDS. But it's very, very easy for me on a Saturday to accidentally upload something into Dropbox. I don't use Dropbox, in case anybody's listening here. But it's very easy for folks to do this. All that money, all that spend, all that focus that your organizations, your security teams have put on keeping the outsider from coming in has left this gap of what that insider is doing once they're already in. And again, 99% of those actions are non-malicious. They're not trying to do anything to harm the organization. They're trying to do their job, but they're inherently putting the organization at risk. So this IRM approach, this insider risk management approach, which has been, I guess, blessed and codified by Gartner earlier this year. Last week, they wrapped in UEBA, their previous designation for a market, into insider risk management itself, because it does involve people, process, and technology. It is not a one-stop shop. There is no silver bullet that is on the market, including my own organization, that will completely protect your organization from insider risk. It is a multifaceted, multi-phased problem that takes an entire organizational push to change, both in people, by addressing the ability to create risk that your users drive, process, how do you operate, how do you manage, how do you deal with insider risk events, and ultimately technology. What are you using to fill those gaps to get the visibility on essentially the file movement that your users are doing? Because when we look at file, vector, and user risk, It's the who, the what, and the where, right? Who took the data? Where did it go? And ultimately, what do I do about it, right? What impact is that on my organization? I need to know everything around that to better understand how to remediate, how to mitigate these situations going forward. So when we go take a spin around this wheel, we'll see this wheel a couple times in the next couple of slides. Really from the outside in, it's all about identity. I started off with that human icon for a reason, because it is about identity. Identifying the who, the employee, the vendor, the contractor that has access to your network. Defining risk tolerance. It's not about necessarily data classification. What is your risk tolerance around corporate data loss? You could probably pick those out without looking at classified files. Understanding the things that are actually going to really impact the organization negatively should they get out in the public. Prioritizing those risk indicators. And what do I mean about risk indicators? A sales leader with Salesforce level access has exfiltrated documentation to his or her, a customer list to his or her endpoint, uploaded that to their personal Dropbox, and quit the next day. That's a risk indicator. That person downloading something to their endpoint and sending it to an unsanctioned cloud, storage, email, app, you name it, printer, AirDrop, Bluetooth. That's the risk, and prioritizing those, understanding the human, the what, the file, and ultimately the where it goes. And then we talk about how to provide risk remediation. It's not just about P, it's not just about prevention, right? Prevention is playing whack-a-mole with things that you're now trusting your users to classify, document, and maintain. That's probably not realistic. We've gone through 7 years of digital transformation in about 18 months. So when you look at decentralized data and you look at how data is essentially constantly in movement at this point with a hybrid workforce, it's about automating as much of that remediation as possible. And that's not a silver bullet thing. That is really engaging your entire ecosystem. You bought a number of solutions like a $4 million IDS that have compensating controls in there. It's about putting that ecosystem to use, because over time, you want to have those board-level conversations about how you're improving your risk. And improving your risk isn't like we blocked 400 different files on every other Tuesday. No, it's about saying we've addressed our organization so that our events aren't happening. We are in a hybrid workforce, but we don't necessarily need our employees printing everything out at home. Or if they do, we need to be aware of it. We need to know what it was. Because when you look at a framework, you take those 5 attributes that we just talked about, and you look at those outputs. Context, visibility, just understanding the files that are leaving the environment, right? It's not really an insider risk or corporate data leak or insider threat perspective until corporate IP starts leaving your environments, right? I could be checking my email at 1 o'clock in the morning. I've got young kids. Is that an indicator of risk? No. But did I check my email at 1:30 in the morning, log into something else, download something to my endpoint, and send that off? Or did I already have something sitting on my endpoint that I sent off at 1:30 in the morning to an unsanctioned, untrusted source? That's really that context. Alignment across the business. Insider risk management is not a security problem. Not just a security problem. You're not in this fight alone. You have HR, you have legal, you have managers around the entire environment that could help you change the risk profile of the organization. Why? Because human interaction is a lot more impactful than just blocking me from sending a file out. I was notified about me backing up my iCloud to my personal device, my corporate desktop to my personal iCloud. Tell you what, I've never done that again. I've ran multiple updates. I always make sure that box is unchecked now. I really, really make sure that box is unchecked now. I don't want security to call me in 30 seconds. They've changed my approach. They've changed my culture by direct outreach. And we want to make sure that the risk alerting is intelligent, right? You need to understand what is happening in your environment. You can't just deal with a bunch of noise. Every solution that you have creates that noise. Every solution that creates that noise dumps it into some type of repo, which is now even noisier. But again, if you could look at the people, process, and technology around it and understand the file, the vector, and the user movement, you can understand and get some additional intelligence and context around what those users are doing and where they're sending your corporate IP and why. And then response. It is right-sized, right? We can nuke an endpoint. We can remove a user from the network. No problem. Those are the last 2 things you want to do. When you're trying to affect and reduce your risk posture around insiders, it's about a whole other approach as well. Engaging in security awareness, engaging with their managers, engaging with HR, proactively reaching out to legal if something potentially malicious has arisen. And to do so in near real time so that a year later, you're not making the headlines for suing an employee who did something a year prior. We want to make this, you need to make this as quickly and efficient of a process as possible. Why? Because ultimately you need to optimize your security maturity. You need to show the board and the organization that you're constantly improving, right? And how do we do that? Well, engaging your organization, those 99% of the folks that are doing the job, or the 100% of the folks that we highlighted earlier that present all of that risk. More ingrained with the data use policy, right? I've been at a number of organizations where I've signed those T's and C's around getting my laptop. Did I actually read them? Probably not. I can tell you for a fact I definitely didn't when I joined Code42. Why? Because I've done it a million times. But the second I backed up my personal iCloud with my corporate desktop, you better believe I started paying attention to it. And every little thing that I'm doing at that point, I'm paying attention to. I don't want Austin to call me again. And it creates a risk-aware culture, right? I'm now risk-aware. I now understand the risk that I present to my environment. I understand the fact that in my role, I have access to numerous documentation, both internal roadmaps and some source code pieces, as well as customers and prospects. And some of y'all are on our prospect list. And the ability that I have to accidentally send that out is tremendous. I have a device that's connected to the internet, or Bluetooth, or AirDrop, or USB or removable media, and I can accidentally put something in there. I could get annoyed at work, and I could automatically put something in there and say, I'm backing this up. I loved that project that I did. You guys didn't pay me. My organization didn't pay me to create that as a piece of work for myself, right? I got paid for that by the organization. I have no right to it at the end of the day. But understanding and creating that risk-aware culture, that everything you do while you're a badged employee is for the organization. Everything you do as a badged vendor or contractor is for the organization whose project you're working on. That is creating that risk-aware culture, and then ultimately it's time to value. What is that? What do I mean by that? Well, let's reduce the noise, right? If we could hook into your LMS and you can hook into your HR management system and start tracking some of these things and start getting the humans involved. Start getting the learning process involved and the security awareness training to be focused on what it needs to be. We can get to blocking and we can get to removing the user, but let's do those last. Let's figure out first what's going on in the organization and how to ultimately change it so that Austin isn't calling me every other week because I keep backing up my system to my iCloud. And that's really important. And when we talk about ecosystem, again, there's no silver bullet that's out there. It really does take a village. You've paid for that village. It's in your stacks today. Right? And when we look at identity, we start around the wheel. Where is data at risk? I don't know your organization. I can't tell you that. But when I hook into identity, privileged, or HCM solutions, well, that gives me a lot more clarity. Those are solutions that you folks are using to drive the information around the environment, drive the access around the environment. Those HCM solutions, that's not a security solution at all, but that is vital to understanding who your employees are, what they're doing, what the hierarchy is, what are they supposed to be doing. And when we transition off of that, understanding what data risk matters, right? What does matter for you? We went through a couple of things earlier on that slide with my algorithm of icons. But when you look at that, it's understanding, again, not classification. They're not relying on me to classify the roadmaps that I help create. But we're concerned about that, right? And you have other solutions that can provide that information. You have other solutions that can bring this all together to understand what data risk matters, and then understanding what is your risk. Getting those insider risk indicators. You've got a developer, senior level, leaving for a competitor who's downloaded source code to his endpoint, renamed the file from sourcecode.zip to vacationpictures.png. Raise your hand if you have a firewall rule for vacationpictures.png. That's what I thought. So vacationpictures.png left, the employee left, and your source code left. Understanding that ahead of time, being able to capture this information while they're badged employees or vendors or contractors before their project ends, allows you to do a lot more things in controlling that data risk and understanding where that risk is and bringing that back in, because you want to be alerted into your specific solution, whether that's an analytics, an EDR, a SIM, et cetera. Getting that information, you're all shorthanded, let's be honest, we're all looking at single panes of glass as much as possible, right? There's not enough people to manage all of the solutions you have and sit in them every day. So getting that information to where you need it in near real time so that that response piece, the SOARs, the identities, the EDRs, the XDRs, the NDRs, the PAMs and the ITSMs can start really operationalizing this wheel, right? We can start that response process, and we can do it in the right way, in the right size response, because we're not just looking at nuking the endpoint, removing the user. We're talking about, in things like PAM, just removing elevated privileges. If I have access to something that you're noticing me send a lot of stuff out, you don't need to remove me from the network. Just don't let me get into that piece anymore, right? I just don't need that access to that data if I'm going to be completely irresponsible with it. It doesn't serve the benefit of the company. And then why it matters. Being able to assess and track your progress, right? It's very important because this isn't just a, did we remediate all the vulnerabilities? Did we handle a Patch Tuesday well? What's it look like when Patch Tuesday comes up? Right? We're not worried about that. What we want to look at, though, is that human vulnerability. How are you affecting those humans, and how are they changing over time? You can't go bop people on the head. It's illegal. But if you can coach them the right way, if you can let them know where they are erring on the side of, not so great, or violating your policies, we want to enable you with that. We want you to help you create those base marks, the baselines and benchmarks, because being able to understand what your humans are doing with your corporate IP is very, very important to reducing your overall risk. And again, this is an ecosystem wheel. This is one of those pieces that look like, yeah, there's a Code42 logo on there, but guess what? We got a bunch of other ones, right? Again, no silver bullets out there. It's important to leverage the things that you have spent $4 million on. It's important to leverage the things that are gaining additional telemetry around your environment and putting those into practice when you're looking at your insiders, your trusted users, the folks that you said, yes, you could have access to that source code.zip file, but you don't want them to change it to vacationpictures.png, right? And the more intelligence you have about the files that are created, about the humans that are touching those files, and about the vectors, the places that those files are going, the more proactive you can be, again, not only looking at how to remediate this from a security perspective, but affecting change throughout the organization. It's about communication. It's about visibility and ultimately driving action into the environment. And driving action to the environment, like I said, blocking's the last. There's plenty of solutions and plenty of logos up here that can block things, that can remove users, that can do different things to that environment. But when you look at what you can do within SOAR or with HCM or contacting their manager and having a conversation because something happened, data drives the results. Data drives that visibility. But insider risk management involves your entire organization. It involves your entire security stack, and it involves things beyond your security stack today. Because insider risk management is a people, process, and technology problem. And to be able to solve that, it's not about going and finding that one thing that's going to do it. It's about finding the many. You have most of them probably deployed today. Hooking them in and making them work in concert with each other is going to help drive visibility, and it's going to help drive risk awareness for the entire organization. It's important to leverage those things. It's important to look at those solutions that can bring you the right information, the right telemetry, and ultimately the right response to insider risk threat.